Well, annual inflation rose for the first time in 4 months in August. It rose to 5.2%, and this was up from 4.9% in July. This is mainly because of the rising oil prices, and we've seen the cost of petrol soar to as high as $2.30 a litre in parts of Australia. The government, however, is resisting calls to intervene on the rising cost of fuel. And this is despite Anthony Albanese attacking Scott Morrison in a tweet before the federal election when he said that petrol prices had surged on his watch, surged on Scott Morrison's watch, but they were about $1 a litre back then. Treasurer Jim Chalmers today downplayed concerns about whether this would all trigger another rate rise when the RBA meets for the first time under the new leadership of Governor Michele Bullock on Tuesday.
Historically, what the Reserve Bank tries to do is to understand the overall direction of travel. Quarterly inflation peaked before the election last year, the March quarter, in annual terms around Christmas time. And so the direction of travel has been really clear. Inflation's moderating overall.
All right, joining me now is economist and columnist with The Australian, Judith Sloan. Judith, wonderful to see you. Look, inflation rose to 5.2%. How much of this is a reflection of government policies, or is it only petrol prices, oil prices that we're looking at? And how much of it also has to do with, what Terry McCrann describes as an off-the-leash Tony Burke, who's got these radical IR policies that are pushing up wages, beyond inflation?
Well, good to be with you, Sharri. So petrol prices are contributing, but as you say, there are other factors, in particular rent rises. So what you have to understand about the inflation figures is that there are official quarterly figures, and they're kind of the comprehensive ones, but the ABS more latterly has put out monthly ones. So this week it was a monthly one, so it's not as comprehensive as the quarterly one. That doesn't come out until the end of October. But up until this point, there had been a consistent downward trend in the inflation figures, both quarterly and monthly. So I think Jim Chalmers might be being a bit hopeful in saying that there's nothing here. Because the thing you have to understand is that interest rates in Australia are not just set on the basis of Australian conditions. In fact, interest rates in Australia are quite low. And what's happening in the global oil market is bearing on both bond prices and interest rates and what we call the yield curve, the difference between short-term rates and long-term rates. And it actually looks like quite a turbulent time. So I think, being sanguine as Jim is at the moment is, I think, rather surprising, really, because I think if I were to bet my house, and I guess there's a joke there with rising house prices, you'd have to say that interest rates are likely to stay high and for longer in Australia, and that's probably the best case scenario. And I think there is now a real possibility that the cash rate will move upwards, maybe not until 2024, but it's hard to see the ongoing decline that some had hoped next year actually occurring.
So there you are, Judith Sloan, predicting that rate rises will stay high across 2024. I guess we had been predicting that, once inflation started to fall, they'd start to be cut, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And probably not a rate rise with Michele Bullock's first board meeting on Tuesday. But yep, you can.
No, I don't think so. I think they're not going to jump the gun on this. But another part of the story is, because, the trouble with economics is that everything's connected, is the incredibly low value of the Australian dollar. So, it's now below 65 cents US. And that, of course, self-feeds into the inflationary cycle because, as you know, imported goods become more expensive. And that in itself is a real worry. It's not a specific target of the Reserve Bank, the value of the Australian dollar, but they will be looking at that. And indeed, it's really an indicator that the Australian economy is not doing that well, the fact that the Australian dollar has been falling so sharply as it has all through this year.